The first thing I want to show is you can see here that my workspace has changed a little bit from the last video. In the last video, remember I mentioned that you can change your workspace up here. And so this workspace icon, essentially, I was working under Essentials before, and so it looked like this. And I've customized the window since the last time. So I just click here, and you can see I saved a preset up here that I named RD 2022. That's the year that I'm recording this demo here. And so the way that I created the customized interface here is I just kind of started with Essentials Classic. You can see it all changes up here a little bit. And with Essentials Classic, some things that I like about it over the main Essentials is that this toolbar expands out, so we get some more tools available to us here. So kind of some more advanced options show up. And additionally, let's see here, we get this window up here, so we can kind of change some of the stroke options up at the top. The properties window is here, and then we can also find these other icons here that show us some other helpful windows. And so in order to kind of customize things, I believe normally on Essentials Classic it might look like this when you start out. So these windows right here, each of these indicates, so this is Windows Navigator right here. So the way you find each of these is you just find them under Windows, and they're all show up as these options right here. And so let's say, for instance, that the Navigator is not showing up for you right now, and you'd like to have the Navigator up. And let's say the library, the layer is not showing up for you either. And so the way to add those is you go to Windows, and I'll go down and find Navigator. It'll show up right here. And I just click on this tab and drag it wherever I want it to go. So I'll probably want it to go towards the top here. So I'll just drag it in, and you'll see a blue kind of preview indicator showing where it's going to slot in here. So I'll put it right there, and it loads in. And let's say I want to add the layers window down to this bottom right area. I'll go to Window, find Layers right here, and it's a big panel, and I could either drag it into, if I dragged it right here, it would go into this sidebar with a Navigator window. But if I wanted to go in the bottom, I need to drag it right here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little blue line at the very bottom right of my interface. If I click there, it shows up there. And so I just customized this the way I liked, brought up the windows that I know I use a lot and put them into here. And then when I was done, I went to the Workspace tab up here, and then went to Manage Workspaces. And then right here, I named it, pressed OK. And then once I did that, it'll kind of show up in this top window right here. So you can see I did that for RD 2022 version 2, which is kind of the layout I'm going to use here. So I'm just going to cancel instead of saving that so I don't clutter things. But now, if I want to go to my Customize Workspace here, you just click on that, and it'll kind of change up a little bit. This is pretty similar, right, to my customized interface. So just only a few things changed there. And that's how you kind of get this interface laid out, up to your specifications. And you can pretty much make as many of those workspaces as you want right there as well. So, oh yeah, and one other thing I'd like to mention here is if you can see this little line right here, that's between the Navigator window and the Strokes window right there. What that indicates right now is if I click the Navigator window, you can see that Navigator is the only tab that shows up. And I'll just press these arrows to bring it back in. And you see here that Stroke and the Pathfinder and some other windows are all within that line and that line right there where my cursor is. So if I click on the Stroke, you can see that they show up as little tabs here that you can tab through. So that's kind of what these lines indicate. So you can kind of make chapters for yourself here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to bring up beyond just the customizing the interface is how to use swatches. So you can use, there's a bunch of color theory principles that you can use, which I bring up in class, and I provide this PDF here, and that's on the D2L for you to review. And the last option that's shown here is at the very bottom, which is the natural color scheme, where you can take a photograph, generally something taken in nature, and if it's a good photograph, generally speaking, there'll be, just by the natural order of things, there will be a unified palette that you can kind of pull from using the Eyedropper tool. The Eyedropper tool being this button right here. Shortcut for it is I. And you can create your own palette, and that can sometimes be a really good starting point as you begin to kind of lift off with your project. So that's what I'm going to show here. And so I've already gone online and I found this photo. And to bring it into Illustrator, all I need to do is just click on it and then just drag it into my document right there, and it shows up. And I'll bring my Illustrator interface back to full screen. I'll just do it this way. And then remember, I can press Command 0 to get my document back to full screen, and I'll press V, and that gives me the ability to kind of free transform this. If I hold Shift, I can get this back up to a large size. And so here I'm going to show how to build a swatch library. And so a swatch library is super helpful, and it's a way of keeping a unified and simplified color palette and making it so that every time you choose a color for a shape in your scene, you don't have to click in this fill color and be messing around with all this. Or, you know, copying and pasting hex codes from here, which is something you can do if you want to kind of pick a color and you really like that purple. You can select that code right there and press Command C. And the next time you're picking a color, you can just press Command V to paste and OK. And it'll do the color. But that's a pretty laborious and convoluted way of working, and swatches is a much more efficient, quicker way, and it'll just make things a lot more fun for you. You won't be diving through menus, copying hex codes. So the first thing I do to use a swatch library is I'll show you where the swatch window is. So I have it loaded right here on my interface, but you can find it under Window and then go down to Swatches right there, and it'll pull up. And so the way that the swatch library works is up here, we just have some almost random colors that Illustrator has loaded into it, and then kind of 2 preset folders that you can use. And so when we make our own swatch palette, it'll kind of look like this right here, where you have a folder and then you have the colors to the right of it. And so that's kind of what we'll be looking forward to here, but we have a step to do first. And so the step that we need to do first is I'm going to make a series of just plain black boxes. And I got this from purple with a black stroke to black just by swapping the fill and stroke color by pressing these little arrows right there. And then I'm going to select the stroke and then press none right there. So now instead of having a purple box with black stroke around it, we're going to have just plain black boxes here. And to make boxes, I'll just do the rectangular tool, hold Shift and drag to get it square, and then I can press V to move it around. And so there's a few ways. I'm going to make a bunch of these boxes here, and so there's a few ways we can copy and paste this. One easy way is on a Mac, if you hold Option, you see how my cursor changes right there when I click Option, and then it just creates a copy out of it that I can drag around. And I'm holding Option right now as I drag, and if I take my second finger and hold down Shift, it snaps it in line with it vertically. Or if I hold it up here, it's pretty smart about it, and I'll hold Shift, it snaps it vertically, horizontally. So, oops. So you just press Option and then Shift, and I'll press Option and Shift again. Oops. So you have to press Option first, start dragging, and then hold Shift to kind of lock it into place right there. So you can do it for a single shape, or using V, I can select all 3 shapes right there and press Option and do the same thing right there. So that's one way to copy and paste. I'll press Edit Undo. And so another way to copy and paste is you select all the shapes using the V tool. You press Command C to copy, and then if I press Command V, it'll kind of paste it into almost like a random spot here, right there. So that's Command V, and again, so you can also find that in Edit Copy, Edit Paste, and you see the shortcuts right there. A really helpful shortcut here as well is you can press, you can copy it in place, and that becomes useful a ton in Illustrator. I use it a lot here. And so the way you paste it in place is you just, as normal, you press Command C to copy. Then you press Shift and Command V. And when you do that, it pastes it right in place on top of itself. And now with it's selected by default. And so if I just click and drag, you can see that I copied everything and kept it in place. So that's going to be really useful when we're like working with a character and we're working on their head or something like that, and we need to copy and paste a part of the head and kind of having a word salad moment here a little bit. But it just, the Shift, Command, and V to copy and paste comes up a lot, and it's a really helpful shortcut to know here. And so I think I made one too many right there. I think that'll be enough. So these black boxes, I'm going to use the Eyedropper tool to give each box its own color, and I'll use these to create my swatch library. So I'll start with the first box here, and I'm going to start with a dark purple, so there's not going to be a big change that happens with this one. But notice that I press V and select that box right there. And then I'm going to use the Eyedropper tool, which is this button right here. Or you can press I on your keyboard, which is what I'm going to do. So just press I, and I'm going to press a dark purple right here and change that black to a dark purple. Now I'm just going down to the next box, and I might choose a lighter purple. So I'm selecting that box, holding down I, clicking there. And I can, if I don't like that one, I can click in different spots with the Eyedropper tool and find different colors. That looks okay. And I'm going to kind of do my color palette. I'm going to work from cool to warm here. And something that's nice about this photo here is we have the purples here as our primary color. We have a few blues, which will be helpful, but then we also have the complementary color scheme up here in the corner. Let's see here. So for this one, I'll go over there. Try to find some sort of in-between. And if you find that you want to use more colors, right, you can just press Option, click and drag to copy and paste that one. Press V to select it, and then I can press I again and maybe choose one of these colors up here. I can kind of keep clicking till I find what I want. Okay, so let's say that's a color palette I want. So the swatch library is really helpful. I think some people might be tempted just to kind of keep these boxes up in the corner and just kind of use these, but you'll kind of notice is if you decide to work that way that a lot of the time these colors, you'll just kind of click a button by mistake and then one of these colors will get changed and then it's kind of lost forever, and it can get a little hairy. Plus it's on your document and it'll just kind of be in your way. So the better way to work, I think, is to open up the swatch library window, and there's two ways to add swatches that I'll show here. So the first way, I'll show you how to add swatches one at a time, and then next I'll show you how to just take all of these boxes that we made and just add that as a big swatch group all at once. So adding them one at a time, we'll first create a new color group right here by clicking this folder button at the bottom, and you could name it, but I'll just press OK. And I can just, what you need to do is just select the swatch you want to create. So I'll start at the bottom with a pink, and then I'll press the plus button next. It'll give me this window, and I'll press OK. And you see it added the pink into that top folder or that top window up there, and I just need to click on it, normal click, and then just drag it down till I get that blue cursor thing right there next to my folder and paste it in place. And so if I wanted to add another one at a time here, I can just click on that one, press the plus button, OK, and then just drag it into my swatch group right there. And then I'll show one last one here. So I'm doing this kind of reddish orange pink thing here. So I'm making sure I select it, press the plus button, OK, and then just click it and then drag it in like that. And so that's one way you can kind of build it up. So I'm going to trash this by just selecting that group and throwing it in the trash by pressing this trash icon right there in the bottom right and pressing yes. Okay, so how do you add these all at once? Really simple operation. You just, with the V tool here, so the selection tool, I just drag and select all those boxes that I've made. And then if I just press the folder button right there, new color group, it's going to give me this window, and I'll name this demo 1. And just these default settings work. We just want to use the selected artwork, include swatches for tints, that's okay. So right there, and just by default, it creates a swatch group for me based off of the shapes that I have there, which is great. And so there's just one more step we need to do, and this is the same if I do it one at a time or if I do it as a group like I did just there. Seems like it saved a, oops, saved a black swatch right there that I don't want. So I'm gonna so you see what's happening here is I want to get rid of that black swatch right there. Notice how all my swatch, all these rectangles are selected at the same time. So if I click on it, they all turn black at the same time. So what I need to do if I want to throw that in the trash is I need to just press V and click off of it. And now I can just drag that into the trash and it's gone. And so that's kind of the way this works here. So if I have a shape here and it's pink right now and I want it to be more of a blue, all I need to do is just, you see I have that rectangle. At any point I can just click on it and it'll change to whichever swatch we have there, which is great. And also, one thing that's really great about swatches is, let's say that I've made a full image and it's done, it's all filled in, but I decide at the very end I want to change the color palette to from, for instance, it's in a cool color palette and I want to change it to warm. Well, I can just, if I click on this and then change the color of it to red right here, and I change that swatch to red, even if I have 1,000 shapes that were referencing that swatch before, they'll all update to that new red color right there. So you can really quickly just change your whole color palette, even at the very, very end, really quickly. And normally that would, depending on how complex your project is, that could take a full day if you, depending on the complexity of it here. But last step here that we need to do, and this is super important here, is the swatches don't save automatically, meaning that if I were to save this document, close down Illustrator, and then open it up again, this would still all be here in the document, but this swatch right here would be gone and we wouldn't be able to get it back unless we recreated it. So what I need to do is I need to click on that group right there, go down to this little library icon at the bottom left of the swatch window, click on it, and then I need to save the swatches right here. So if I just press save swatches, it'll give me this. And if you're on your personal computer, you don't really need to navigate anywhere. Just this default swatches folder right here, it's showing up in the Adobe Illustrator application in a safe folder that's not going to go anywhere. And so this is a great place to save it. If you're on one of the school computers, you might need to navigate to your flash drive right now to save this. But since I'm on my personal computer, this is great. So I'll just do video demo 1 is what I'll save this as, and press save. And it's now secure. And so next time I open up Illustrator, what I'll need to do is, let's just say that I open up Illustrator and it will look like this. Next time I open up Illustrator, it'll appear to be gone. Is I need to click on that library folder, go down to user defined, because I saved it. You remember I saved it in the that kind of default swatches folder. That's the user defined folder right there, and you can see I named it Video Demo 1, so it's right there. So if I click on it, it shows up in a new window right here, but it's there. And if I want it to show up in the right window, I can just click on that folder right there and it'll load up. And if it doesn't load up for you, when you click on this little folder where my cursor is right now, you can just click it and drag it on right there and it'll load in. And you can see you can save a bunch of other swatches from the past there, delete them out, kind of organize them as you go there. And so that's a really important lesson there. And Photoshop has uses swatches as well, so you can have a similar system there. And a lot of painting programs, even if you're not familiar with it in the program, will probably have something like that you can use if it's a decent program here. So that is swatches right there. And so when I'm working on my document, I'll have a nice color palette to work from if I do that. So in the last lesson, I'm going to make a new document here. We talked about the pen tool and how to create shapes right here. And remember, if you just hover your cursor over the initial point, a little O will show up in the bottom right of your cursor, and you can close off a loop. And then here you have a shape, and we can increase the size of it right here by increasing the stroke. And I showed you the layers window. And so something new here is by default, we just end up with this very uniform line that happens here. And we do have a lot of room to adjust it here. If you recall, we have these Bezier handles where we can change the shape. I can press, let's see, Shift Command C, and was it Command C? I'm sorry. Shift Command C. What am I doing? Sorry, Shift C. Shift C for the anchor point tool, and we can either kind of change it so that we create a handle that we can make into a soft line right there, or if you have a soft line and you want it to become a hard point, you just click on it and it becomes a hard point right there. So you can kind of bring each anchor point back and forth using that Shift C tool right there. We can press P for the pen tool, and if I press by default, if you just hover it over the line, oops, sorry, you can create new anchor points right there. And if you hover it over an anchor point that exists, and I just have the pen tool selected, so shortcut P, you can delete out an anchor point right there. You can also press, if that little plus and minus aren't showing up for you right there, you can just press plus on your keyboard and it'll go into kind of add anchor point mode right there. And you can press minus on your keyboard to delete out anchor points right there. And so we have this uniform line right here. And so there's some things we can do to change up this shape here. So I'm going to just start off with the rectangle tool just to kind of show this easily. So we use the rectangle tool, and we have a stroke of 14 pixels right there, and I can increase it up to 23. And right now it's a uniform line, but let's kind of go from left to right here a little bit. So if I click on stroke, where it says stroke right here, there's a hidden menu that shows up. So right now we have a white fill color. We can change it to be empty right there, or we can change it to be yellow, for instance. I'll have it be empty. This is the color of the stroke. Then we have the thickness of the stroke. But if I click on stroke right here where it says stroke, you can see it expands out that menu where I can change out the size of the stroke, and I can also change the cap, the corner. I can change whether it's a dashed line right here. And so let me demonstrate some of these that I can. In order to demonstrate the cap, I'll need to draw that out with the pen tool. So we'll show that in a moment. But for the corner, I think we'll be able to see that. It's really subtle. Oops. Let me zoom in here. So by default, it'll look like this. And then if I change the corner there, it'll round it out. And then if I click this one, it'll create like a little bit of a hard edge right there. So these are just some controls you can do to add a little more control to your shapes here. So I'll press 25. Oops. I'll press 25 and change it. And it kind of changes the limit of things a little bit. If I select the stroke again and go down, we can align the stroke. So by default, the stroke goes right through the center of the pen tool. You can see it right there, or the shape. The vector shape is right there, and the stroke goes right down the middle of it. If I click here, it'll align within it. If I click out here, it'll align outside of it, and I can change it back to the center again. I can have my stroke become a dotted line right here. And with this, we can control the distance between each dash. So by default, it should be at 12. If I type in 24, you see the space between each dash increases. And if I click here and change it to 5, it'll get really tight in there. So those are kind of some controls that you can get over your lines. And even if I drew this out with a pen tool, I would have those same controls available to me right now. And we can also change the profile right here. So let me get this off dash line for a sec. So by default, it's at uniform. if you click on this, it kind of gives it a bit of a taper profile. Do you see how the line gets really thin and then really thick out there? And there isn't a ton of control to this. Also, you need to make sure the shape is selected before you update it, or else it won't update. But sometimes this can be like a quick way to add some variation to your lines right here by doing this. I'll show you a way where you have much more control over it in a moment here. But this is what the profile window does. And by default, it's under uniform. So if I select the shape and I change it back to uniform, it's the same all the way around. Let me show you real quick the cap tool. So if I do, I'm just going to draw a simple line, press V to get out of it with the pen tool right there, or to stop drawing, I mean. And the cap tool, last thing I'll show under the stroke window, when you just click where it says stroke right there, is if you look at the corners of this, by default it's got a hard edge. And if I click on stroke, I can give it a rounded cap right there. And this cap, you see how the alignment changes a little bit? So by default it looks like that. And then this one kind of expands it out a little bit. So the advantage of doing this round cap a lot of times is if you have two lines kind of joining together and they're not totally connected, but they're coming into a similar spot like this, the round cap kind of takes away some of the severity of that. Whereas if I had the default, you see how that can get pretty janky, and like you get that little gap in there and stuff like that. So the round cap can be a way of, if you have like a little bit of a looser design and you want it to feel a little more under control and a little less abrasive, you can use that to kind of round some things out sometimes. And so we're moving left to right here. So next up, really important one is the brushes. So when I do the brush tool, or sorry, the pen tool, I'm going to just draw out a shape. Doesn't matter if I finish it or close it off. I will not close this one off. I'll just press V to finish off the line there. And so a line looks like that by default. It's under uniform, and I'll keep it under uniform here because again, these controls they can be helpful, but there's only a few options and you don't have a ton of control over them. So if I want variation to my line, something I'll do is I'll go over to this next one, which is the brush window. And this brush window, you can find it right here on the interface, or you can go, it's right here under my interface. You can see the icon with the brushes there, so that's pretty intuitive. And you might need to go to window and then find brushes right there to pull it up. And so with the brush window, you can see here basic is the default. And if I select this one option right here, you can see my line changes to like more of a pen stroke kind of line. And so you kind of get some organic flavor to it a little bit here. And something that's nice is this is still a non-destructive way of working, so I can change my path and continue to adjust that, but I still kind of get some of the advantage of that organic pen stroke right there. And you can see there's only two usable options right there and then two weird ones. And so you can just go under this bottom left icon, the library window, click on that, and we get all these options down here that you can choose between. And so for instance, I could change this to, let's look at some of these. We can do, let's just try the bristle brush library. This is going to be a little weird, I think, but I can change the brush to look something like that. And so you get like a little bit of a marker feel to it. It gets a little funky in some of these areas over here. A library that I use a lot is I'll go to library, artistic, and then I like the first one, artistic calligraphy here. And some of these can be really nice. And so you get these options right here. The rounded ones are going to just usually look, oops, I need to make sure that my shape is selected. These rounded ones are going to look a little bit more like your default basic. As you get to these ones that have a little more of an ovular shape to it, let's choose this diagonal one. So with this diagonal one, the line will get really thin right here where my cursor is, because it's going to line up with where it's getting thin with that diagonal. But as I go down this way, with this 45-degree angle, the line should get really thick right there. So let's try that. So you can see you get a lot of variation there with that one. So you can kind of go through the library, click through options. You can download options online as well. An option like this one can be nice. And when I say download online, you can go to resources like ArtStation and things like that, and artists will have made their own presets that you can download and kind of install into your system here, or add to your library. You can see user defined right there under the library, so you can add it into your user library and use other people's brushes. This brush right here is what I'm using, and I like this one a lot because you can see it gets a little thicker right there, but thinner there. It just adds like a little bit of subtle variation. If you're kind of going for something clean, but you want a little bit of variation in your line, an option like that can be good. And one last thing I'd like to say about these is that you might click on these and you might think to yourself, this looks good, but the line's way too thick or too thin. You're not pigeonholed into the thickness of these lines right here. I can still change the stroke down on these. You can go down to 0.25 on this, and you can see you can kind of thin out that line just by changing the stroke right there. So these brushes are more about like the behavior of the stroke rather than the actual thickness of the stroke. So even if I do an option like this where it's just starting to get way too thick for me in some areas, I can just kind of take the stroke down to 0.25 usually and kind of get that under control. And if no matter what you do, the stroke is too thick, you can also take your whole drawing, maybe by selecting your entire layer and selecting it and then scaling it up, making your whole document bigger, your whole design bigger, and that'll give you more room to maneuver with a thick line, right? So if my drawing's really small, like this, if I'm working with a tiny drawing, it's going to be really hard for me to get the right pen size because you can see my stroke is already at 0.25 right there, and I can't really go down any further. I might be able to type in 0.1, let's see. So you can type in your own numeric values here. Let me try 0.05. But you can see that just gets a little harder in there. Whereas if I take the drawing and I have things larger, I have more room to maneuver with just kind of using the numeric values within the stroke to get the stroke size that I want. So that is the brush tool. So moving on here, we're kind of combining two lessons into one, so I'm going to try to move as quickly as I can here. In class, one of the next things I showed was the Pathfinder window. Pathfinder window is a really helpful tool here. You can recognize it. Let's see, where did I put this thing? Right here on my interface. And if you don't see it there, right, you can go to Windows and then Pathfinder and drag it wherever you want it to go in your interface. So Windows Pathfinder right there. And so the Pathfinder window, let me create, the best way to demonstrate this is to create two shapes. I'll create a square and I will make that purplish, and I'm going to make a second object. This one will be, let's make this an ellipse or a circle, and I'll make this a different color. Let's go orange. And so the Pathfinder tools, there's a ton of different applications for this, and it might not become immediately apparent when you see this tutorial, but like for instance, if I'm doing a cell shaded style character and I want to carve out some shadows on the character, I use this technique a lot for that. This technique just comes up all over the place with Illustrator, so definitely make sure that you kind of add this to your repertoire here. And so the Pathfinder window is how these two shapes interact with each other. And by that I mean you can use the Pathfinder tool so that you can make it so this circle cuts a hole into that square. You can make it so this square cuts a hole into that circle. You can make them combine into the same shape. You can kind of get them to interact any which way you can think of here. And so it matters when using this to know which layer is on top, or which shape is on top and which shape is on bottom. That's relevant, as well as which order you select them here. So the first option here is I selected the ellipse first, then the rectangle, and let's just see what happens. So I'm going to press the Unite button. So there, it unites them into the same path, the same shape right there. And so if you're kind of, when you're designing like the body of a character here, you could probably imagine how that could be really useful. Imagine, for instance, that you're creating a hand, you create the base of the hand and you draw out some fingers. you can just real quick select them all and then use that unite feature and just combine them really quickly into one object. And that's just kind of a audio example there. So here I'm going to press the ellipse, select the rectangle again. Notice how I kind of press the active selections there instead of just like you can select objects right here, but then you can do the active selections here. And it's important to do that for these. So this one, I selected the ellipse first. I'm going to do minus front. So there you can see that the bottom object cuts into the top object when you do that. If you want to do the opposite of that, I believe if you go just straight down under this one right here, trim, of course when I say it doesn't do it. Oh, that's right, it's a little bit different. Sorry, excuse my misspeaking there. Let's just move from left to right here. So we're going to the third option, intersect. And so intersect, it keeps the area where they have the Venn diagram kind of intersection area there. So if you kind of draw two shapes so that they overlap in a way, you can cut them both away so that you only end up with the area where they're overlapping. Exclude is going to do the opposite of intersect. So it's going to cut out that little intersection area and keep the rest of it right there. And notice that the top layer is the one that keeps its color here. Going down to the bottom window, we have divide. And divide right here, it looks like it didn't do anything, but if it made a group right here, as a side note, at any point you can select, sorry, my mouse is lagging here. A group is created right there, and you can see that it created a shape here for the intersection. So it kind of divided the two shapes into three parts. So we have the intersection area, we have the bottom area, and then we have the top area. And it created a group here, and the group, at any point when you have a group, sometimes groups can make it hard to make selections and stuff like that, and other times they can be really helpful. If you ever have a group, and let's see here, I just need to, sorry, my mouse is lagging from the screen capture here. If you go to Object and then Ungroup right there, that'll get rid of the group right there. And then if you want to add a group to the layers, you just go Object and then Group right there. And so one reason a group might be really helpful, for instance, is if you have a really complicated layer with a bunch of stuff going on, you can add groups just to help yourself stay organized. So because a lot of times when you're working in Illustrator, before you know it, you're going to have a file with 100 layers going on here that you're juggling. So it's important to name them, really important to kind of group your layers, things like that, or just kind of work with layers and name those really well. Just stay organized. It's going to help you out a lot. So sorry for the diatribe there. And I'm going to press Edit Undo to get back to where we were. So selecting the top ellipse, going down to the rectangle, we have trim, which I kind of showed briefly before there, which is going to do something a little similar where the top shape cut a hole into the bottom shape. So my first thought, it is kind of like this tool right here, the minus front, except for it just kind of keeps it visible for a moment there instead of immediately subtracting it. Or it's kind of the reverse, I should say. And then we have merge layers, and so when we do that, it's just going to merge them into a group and then cut a hole. And so as you just play around with these, you'll see that they interact in different ways here. And so I can show you this all day long, but really the best way for you to get to know this is just to create two shapes and try it out for yourself. See how these interact, try to memorize the way they work. And nice thing too is, even if you don't have them memorize exactly what each one does, you can just try them. Let's see here. And then if it doesn't look right, just press Command Z to edit undo and then try another until you kind of get what you were aiming for initially there. And so Pathfinder tool, super, super helpful right here. Okay, so the last technique I want to show here for this demo is how to use the brush tool and how you can kind of use the brush tool and create automatically create colors that fall within it. Within your kind of closed lines, with your closed loops. And this is a process that is pretty easy to do, or not many steps, but it's just a matter of remembering the steps. I even have trouble remembering these steps sometimes. And so under Materials and Resources, under the D2L, so Materials and Resources, if we go under Adobe Illustrator shortcuts, we have our kind of living document here, which I'll continue to add on to. But you can see here we have this bottom section right here. And so this is a step-by-step showing you how to kind of do what I'm about to show here. So if you're ever trying this later on in the semester and you can't quite remember the steps, just navigate to the Illustrator shortcuts, and there's a little walkthrough on this. And so there's 6 steps, and so we'll kind of pull these up one at a time. So the brush tool is a lot like the pen tool. So I'm just going to click on this real quick, and I might give it an empty fill and increase my stroke size. So it's a way of kind of doing the pen tool, except for you just draw it in and it kind of generates the line for you, and then it automatically, if I press A right here, generates the different anchor points. And so one issue I have with the brush tool is sometimes it can create too many anchor points and it can be a little hard to control. But for a lot of you, you might really prefer this, so I definitely want to show it. And so the brush tool, again, you can draw something out, but you can also, we're not limited to that uniform line. Remember, we can kind of go in and we can dive into that library and choose a number of brushes, and you can kind of draw with something pretty organic here. Or I can go into the library and choose something a little, a little in between here. Oops. So I need to make sure that that's selected, then change it. So you can kind of get whatever, basically any kind of brush type you want here. And once you can kind of create a brush using uniform, find the settings you want, and then now it kind of has the settings saved. And that's the same for the pen tool as well. And now when I draw, let's just say that's the brush I want to use, we kind of have that moving forward. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And I'm using my mouse right now. My tablet's kind of fighting me today a little bit because of the zoom capture being a little slow. And so I'm going to draw something out using my mouse, and it's going to be real bad. But I'm going to make a cartoon character here. And I'm kind of being a little, like, I'm actually not fighting the sloppiness of my situation here. There we go. My masterpiece here. And so, let's just say that you have your tablet, you're drawing this thing out and you really prefer this method. Remember with the brush tool that if I press A, I can totally control this. I can press P- and delete out anchor points, press A, kind of drag this to exactly where I want it to go. So you can draw things out and then edit it after the fact here. And so this process is non-destructive here up until this point. But before you proceed further, you want to get this drawing done before you proceed to the next step, because the process becomes destructive after this point. And so and again, just to remind you, when I say destructive versus non-destructive, non-destructive means that I have a line and I can continue to edit it like this. And destructive means we've kind of set it in stone and we can't really change it anymore, or it's become really difficult to change it around. So I'm just going to continue to draw, give it a little Homer Simpson beard there. Okay, so that's step 1 of your drawing process using the brush tool right there. And once you have your drawing the way you want it, we're going to proceed to the next step. Highly recommend for you all that before you proceed to the next step, if you're doing this for your projects, go to File, Save As. Save this as like a version 1 of your project here. And once you follow through these steps I'm about to show, then save that as a version 2. Because again, this is a destructive process, and it'll come in handy sometimes to have these lines available. So if you're working later and you get stuck on something and you really wish you had your lines that you could readjust, you can just open up version 1 of your document and regain control to it again. So step 1. So moving on to step 2, let's see. So once you're done drawing, using the V button, we'll go to the top bar, go to the object window, and go to expand appearance. And so what this step is going to do is it's going to create an outline around the stroke. And so this is the step that's going to kind of make this hard to edit, down the road. So I'm just press V on my keyboard or press this button right here, selected the whole thing, going up to Object, and I'm going to look for Expand Appearance right there. And so I'll click on that. And so now what it did, if you see before, I'm going to press Edit Undo, and then I'm going to press Edit Redo so you can see what happens. But look at this. So I press Edit Undo. You can see that I can see my vector pen line right going through there, my brush line right there. And if I press Shift Command Z to Edit Redo, you see here that our lines are now outlined. But each line is still its own unique object at this point. If I expand out the layer, you can see that it's grouped everything, but each brush stroke is still its own layer right here. So the next step is with the whole thing selected, and I can select all the objects in this layer just by pressing the active button right there next to the layer, is I'm going to go to step 3. So step 3, with everything selected, go to the Pathfinder window and merge. And so this is going to merge all those brush strokes together into one single kind of grouped object here. So I'm going to go to Pathfinder. I'm going to look for merge. So it's the third bottom left right there. And so you can see when I click there that it combined everything into one group. So these all kind of exist as different objects, but it's at least in a group right there for me. Okay, and so what we're going to do is we're going to do a cookie cutter technique here, and so that'll become clear in a minute. But we're going to want one layer. We're going to need to make a copy of this and paste it in place, doing that Shift Command V to paste it in place into a new layer, because we're going to use this as a cookie cutter, and it's kind of going to, this layer is going to go away, but we also want to make a layer as like a backup for our lines that we can put over top everything else. So the next step is that step. So we're now going to duplicate that line shape, and we're going to put it into the copy into a new layer right here. So I'm just going to press this new layer button right here. I'm going to select all my layers by pressing the active button, press Command C to copy, or you can go up to Edit and we can edit, copy, and paste using these up here. So Edit, Copy, then select this layer now, press Shift Command V, and it'll paste it in place. And you can see in the preview there that we have 2 copies of the drawing right there. And I might just lock this top layer just by pressing right there to lock it and make sure I can't move it, and turn off the visibility of it. Okay, so moving on, now we're going to create a large color rectangle that covers the whole drawing, and it needs to what I'm saying here is that it needs to cover just everything that we have in our drawing. So I am going to make a new layer right here, and I'm going to do the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to draw a big box going over the whole thing right there. And once the box is drawn, then I'm going to change the color, and I'll make this yellow, maybe more of a saturated yellow. Okay. Oof, that's a little bright. Sorry, I don't like that. Okay, so and I'm just going to take this layer, and this is really important that you bring it back down below your line drawing. So your layer menu should look like this. You should have a copy of your line drawing up here, your line drawing there, and then your rectangle there. So now we're going to merge these, but let's just show that in this document right here. So using the V tool, we're going to select the large rectangular shape in the line drawing, and then go to the Pathfinder window and merge to merge them together here. So just selecting them both right here, 1, 2, holding Shift, and then under the Pathfinder window, which for me is right here, we're going to click on merge. And it kind of did some magic in there for us. And so what it did is it kind of created a cookie cutter based on the line drawing. And so what I might do is I'm going to turn off the visibility of my lines right here. So this is just kind of hopefully crystal clear what's happening here. And let me open my Swatch library. And so here I can, using the A button, so the direct selection tool, I'm going to select each little slice here, and I'm going to open back up my Swatch library that I created earlier in this demo. And so right now I have the outside, the kind of area outside of my little cat here. If I select that color, you see the whole thing updates. And I can just press A, select this region right here. This is going to be kind of the head. And I can select that and it changes. And so you can just kind of go through and change the colors as you please here. And right now this thing looks like it's got a white outline around it, but remember that I have the copy of my initial brush stroke up there. So, you know, obviously this drawing I did looks terrible right here, but I'm just kind of trying to demonstrate the technique overall. And so if you need to kind of review that technique, you can kind of rewind this video and kind of look at it there. Or additionally, you can just kind of look at these notes that show up here, and that kind of walks you through it step by step. And I tried to write that out as clearly as I could. And so there's one final technique I want to show here that is something I went over this week in class, which is a simple technique here. I'm going to make a new document here just to kind of demonstrate this. It's more of a shortcut than a technique, really. And I'm just going to make a few different shapes here to demonstrate this. Oops. And I think I can demonstrate this with just using 3 layers. So I have 3 layers right here on my document, and they're all on top of each other. Sometimes when you're working with more complicated documents, this might happen here, where things get overlaid. Sorry, I don't like having that white stroke around that. So I'm just going to select each stroke and then turn them off. Okay, so sometimes when you're working with a complicated document, you'll have a bunch of layers stacked on top of each other. And a lot of the times you'll find this, especially as you're constructing a character or something like that using Adobe Illustrator, you'll want to change the order of things. So one way you can do that is you can just grab a layer and then just select it and just drag it down, and you can change the order that way. And I'll press Command Z here. Sometimes when your layers you'll kind of find this once your project starts to get really complicated though, that it can be a little easier to use these shortcuts I'm about to show you. So right now the star layer is on the top layer, and if I want to bring it to the bottom layer, I can click on it, and then I can right click and go down to Arrange. And you can see I have 4 options here. I can bring it to the front. It is on the front. It's on the top layer, which means front. I can bring it forward, which means it'll just jump it up a layer. Again, it's on the top. I can send backward a layer, so I'll just move it down 1 layer, or I can send it all the way to the back here. And you'll notice here that there's these shortcuts. And so if you do, if you press Command and then your right bracket tool, it'll nudge it up a layer. If you press Command and your left bracket tool, it'll nudge it down a layer. And if you press Shift Command in a bracket, it'll either bring it all the way to the front or all the way to the back here. And so if I just press Command in the left bracket right here, you see in my layer menu how I can just quickly nudge it forward and backwards in my layers right there. If I want to bring it all the way to the back, I can press Shift Command and then left bracket, and it pushes all the way to the back. If I want to bring it all the way to the front, Shift Command right bracket brings it all the way to the front. So you can always right click and kind of change it there. But I think really the magic of that tool is knowing the shortcut right there. And so it just makes it so, especially when you're navigating a complicated document, you can just select a layer, press Shift Command right bracket, bring it to the front, Shift Command left bracket, bring it all the way to the back. Or if you're just trying to kind of bring it in front of one object and not the other, you can kind of just press Command bracket right there to change the order there. And so that can be really helpful there. Something else that I'd like to say just in terms of the overall document here and organization with it is, let's say you're having trouble finding something here. Notice that and you have a bunch of layers in your document. You see here a layer 2 is selected here, and it's showing up with that active button right there. And at any point, let's say that my purple hexagon is selected right there. Notice that even when the layers collapse down, that we can see with the active icon right there that something's selected in that layer. So you can imagine if you have like 50 layers going on, you can kind of narrow it down as like you selected the object and trying to find it in your layer menu. You can see that it's active there, expand out the layer, and then you can see with the active icon right there what is selected and what's not. If I press Shift Command bracket and bring forward, notice that it only brings it to the front of the layer right there. So you can't really bring it to in front of this object that's in another layer in front of it. In order to do that, you need to take either the whole layer and drag it in front, or take that shape and grab it and drag it into that layer to bring it to the front. Okay, so that concludes this week's lesson here.